Welcome to today's virtual water cooler chat with Sasha Strauss, hosted by Virtual Patent Gateway. Virtual Patent Gateway founder Ashley Chung has a passion for supporting young creatives in the workplace and is committed to developing a growth mindset within VPG. Sasha Strauss is the founder and CEO of Innovation Protocol, a full-service strategic brand consulting and design firm. He promotes concepts such as social listening, how to align your company's core values to bring value to your clients, and the concept of corporate social responsibility, especially during the post-pandemic era. This webinar is live on Facebook and LinkedIn and is being recorded for future use. And we're going to show you a quick video to get us started.
And I want to credit you, but I want to change your language a little bit because you're using words that suggest that you're kind of, it may be figuring it out in flight, like, well, I've got my freelancers. No, you are running a business. You are running a legitimate enterprise. You're paying people's welfare. You're helping people feed their families. You're creating immense value for your clients. In fact, you're creating so much value that they're like, please come work for me full time. You are a CEO of an enterprise that you made. You should be in love with it. You should see it like your spaceship that's destined to save the universe. Like you're flying the Millennium Falcon. It's your plane, your spaceship. You get to decide what you do with it. What a blessing, what a gift. And to do it in COVID, you realize your talent can be anywhere and you can maximize their productivity and output. You have a built for the future battleship so perfect for what your market requires. Please stay in touch. I can't wait to see where you go. And thank you for being such an incredible listener today. I got to listen in on your group for a minute, and I really appreciated what you shared.
All right, Ashley, take it away.
Well, I hope everyone enjoyed that animation. And this is one of the reasons why I am so impressed and have deep respect for Sasha. I met Sasha probably about February 2021, and I took a webinar from him on Simon Sinek's platform, and I really have been very impressed and follow him. One of the things that made him so unique, and that's why I wanted to bring him in to have him share his expertise on branding, strategy, and how to add value to our businesses. And in even different space, because I am actually, a consultant for patent PTAP practitioners. So normally we don't necessarily have that much in common. So some people say, what are the relevances? Well, what are the relevances like when you go out and like basically your brand is basically your reputation, who you are, so I really have been following his company and his visions and how he actually, the way that he is being so kind and even just coming onto our platform here and as a startup, and I really find him a very impressive human being. So that's how it gets started. But one of the things, especially if you see the animation, the thing that made me so impressed is, and very touched, is that he talked about one of the things he said, we can't believe in you unless we see that you believe in yourself. And one thing that is like, I'm a Chinese American, and traditionally sometimes we do not necessarily want to go out and kind of brag about ourselves. So self-promotion is a little bit more difficult, especially when it comes to having, it sort of has an inherent conflict in that traditional value. So it is something that I'm working on, but it was really amazing when he pointed out, especially helped me see the vision that, well, first of all, that I need to have a vision. And second of all, is that to help me realize something that I hadn't really been thinking about, because that was only a year into the business. So with that, I want Sasha to talk a little bit about himself, and I know he doesn't like to, but just a little bit before we get on to the meat of today's talk. Sasha?
Thanks, Ashley, so much for believing in me and being an awesome, um, both, you were a student, but I think we kind of became friends. You were keeping me up to date on the growth of your business, and I was inspired by all the investment you had made and the way you run your business, the way you teach other people to do what you do. So thanks for including me in your life. Just for context, for everyone who's paying attention to this show, I'm a professional brand strategist. That's my expertise. That's what I do. I've been doing it for about 25 years. And it's sort of nichey because I don't do marketing campaigns or advertising campaigns, nothing that has sort of a temporariness to it. All the work that I do defines organizations for decades, who they are and why they matter beyond today. And it's kind of fun because I get to work with entrepreneurs like Ashley and big organizations and their executives, and both have the same need. How do I communicate to the world who we are and what value we can create beyond price, beyond features, beyond functions? And even though it might seem kind of frustrating that I have to be more than the product I make, the problem is that your audience is distracted and confused and overwhelmed and trying to manage their lives and their business. And so therefore you have to help them. You owe it to them to help them more easily see what you have to offer, more easily relate to what you have to offer. And that's where this becomes a gift. In Ashley's introduction, she mentioned something I like to say, something to the effect of, we can't believe in you if we can't hear you believe in yourself. She and I are not talking about brag your heart out so that everybody knows that you exist. For the audiences that want to buy from you, want to work with you, they need to know that you believe in what you're doing and they believe in yourself, that you believe in yourself while you do it. That's it. We're not talking about bragging. We're not talking about ego. We're talking about honoring yourself and making it easy for others to honor you. And I hope that becomes the foundation of our conversation today, Ashley.
Yep. So let's get started. The very first thing that I want to talk about is naming. What's in a name? So you could talk, I'd like you to kind of talk briefly about how naming works, and I'll give anecdote about how Virtual Patent Gateway came to become Virtual Patent Gateway. So in 2020, January 2020, I got a phone call from a client, and before my company actually exists. So I was actually at Busch Garden. This is not a joke. It's not a storytelling, but it is serious. I was actually at Busch Garden in Williamsburg, Virginia. And then I got a call from one of the clients and said, hey, when are you starting your business? I've heard that you are going to start a business. I'd like to hire you, but I don't have an LLC yet. So, so before I even form a business, people actually already know because I was pretty good at my work, so there were people that knew that I was going to come out and do consulting. And before that, I already have a name in mind, and it was going to be Virtual Patent Paralegal Alliance, because I was giving enough thoughts about something called unauthorized practice of law and making sure that it conveys in the business name that has the word paralegal, so it does not really convey that I'm doing legal consulting. So that's very important to me for ethical boundaries. So I've done my due diligence and I did my research and put it in the State Corporation Commission of Virginia and try to plug it in and everything. All the times before, none of these names were, I did not receive any issues. So I'm like, oh, okay, it should be easy. Then I went on I think January 1st, I went on and it got rejected. And for some reason, I have no idea. I thought that maybe it was me. So I hired a service to duplicate the effort. And they said, no, it's getting rejected. And I'm like, what was the reason? So it turned out that they didn't like the word Paralegal Alliance. And so I was like, so I knew that I had to do virtual. I knew that I have to do patent. But what is the third word that I need to do? Well, in patent litigation, there is, and that's what I have been involved in, supporting patent practitioners for 20 years. And so I know there's something called claim construction. And that's when we put together dictionary terms to illustrate, which side has the better, claim construction. So I have done all of those stuff in terms of copying the dictionary, putting together exhibits. I'm like, got together with a friend and said, hey, I need your help. I need brainstorming. So we both got online dictionary and decided to I said that I cannot do paralegal alliance. I need something that is catchy and something that would just pass so that I could form an LLC. And we went on, and I was like, we're joking, and we were like, oh, let's go a little sci-fi direction and maybe Galaxy, maybe something else. And I'm like, maybe we do Gateway. So we went online, Webster's online dictionaries, and I liked the actual definition, how that it has an opening. And it really, truly describes how my business had come to be. And I just thought that it was totally serendipity in that sense, but it was so much more appropriate and so much sexier than the paralegal alliance. Even though that I do on the website itself, I would make sure that I have the wording paralegal so that people know that I am not practicing law and my company does not practice law. We are supervised by licensed practitioners. So on that, let's take it away, Sasha. What's your process in terms of naming and, for example, innovation protocol? How did you come to do that? That was my story and yours.
Well, thanks for sharing that story, because that's the best way to learn, is from all of us sharing our business process and how we came to be what we are. And, everything that you described, Ashley, even though it might have felt unique to you and like, oh no, I came up with this name and I filed it, but it didn't get accepted, that is par for the course. That is exactly how this world works, especially because you were doing it in English. And the English language is sort of like, the sort of general language in legal affairs. And so often it is the most pursued. Like even Europe, companies that are founded in other countries that speak other languages still file patents in English, still file marks in English because of the defendability about it. So just putting it out there that when you're trying to name your business something in English, it comes with a whole host of additional challenges. But let me go back to sort of like the origins of the naming process, because it will really help everyone listening understand that this is doable. And, when you said naming just a couple minutes ago, and I kind of like shared that it's frustrating, I want everyone to know that naming is hard. It is a burden. It is constantly dead ending. And so if you understand that from the beginning, it can be tolerable. So, for example, when we start a naming process as brand strategy professionals, we do a whole bunch of idea collecting, stimuli collecting, word collecting, so that as we get to the creating, we've got a lot of resources. So, for example, looking at other organizations that provide similar services and how they name themselves, how they name their products, how they name their capabilities. Looking at all the classes that are available and how those classes are named and themed. Looking at all the books in the category that help teach what it is you're going to purvey. All of those things are resources, and the language being used in all of those channels are a resource. And so we start with collecting as much language as possible. I'll also add that we register for trade shows and try to get a sense of what are the speeches at those trade shows, what are the webinars that those trade shows offer. And you can already imagine in your mind how many words start to show up. You get this massive collection of language. So you take that massive collection of language and you just put it over here temporarily. The next thing you do is you start thinking about the products and services that you're going to deliver. What capabilities are you going to sell? And when you think about those capabilities, you try to describe them in as many ways as possible. That way you don't get stuck with just sort of one word like alliance. And by describing them in as many ways as possible, both to the folks that know what you do and the folks that are naive to what you do, you start to unlock a whole range of themes and terms that can do the job of describing the capability, okay? And so by taking all of the, as we shared earlier, the sort of industry language, and then your business's capabilities and the description of those business capabilities, now you can start kind of putting phrases together. Start putting 3 words together, 2 words together, 5 words together, and you try to create a list of 100 options. Not that you love them, but that sort of initial tasting will help you kind of figure out what's ringing, what has a kind of an interesting sort of curiosity to it. And so just to kind of fast forward this conversation, what you'll ultimately do with that list of 100 possible names is start to reduce them based on criteria that you would use to decide whether this name works. Give you an example. Sometimes names get really long. And because of the application environment that you're in, et cetera, long names don't fit. So you decide, you know what? I want a name that is under a certain number of characters. Okay, well, good. Now you can go back to your list of 100 and trim out all the ones that are over a certain number of letters. Perfect. Next, we're going to be doing work in both English-speaking Canada and French-speaking Canada and Spanish-speaking Mexico, and for businesses in North America that might have had founders in other languages. So we want the words to be translatable. Okay, well, it's very easy to use Google Translate and other sources and to get a sense of what is translatable and how easy it is to translate it back into English. And so your list went from 100 based on letter count down to 80, based on translatability down to 40. And you see that we're winnowing the list down, not based on like or dislike, but based on comprehensibility. Now with that remaining pile, remember earlier how I asked about the other organizations that might be working in the category and we don't want any infringements? So now I have that final list of 40. Now I go back to the list of all of those other parties and how they've productized their offerings or named their services. And I contrast that with the list that I prepared, and I realize, oh, these might sound similar. Oh, these have the same abbreviations. Boom, 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 boom. And now we're down to a much narrower list, let's say 10. And then the final step is to use that list of 10 in context, where you might draw up a letterhead. You might make a business card. You might leave a voicemail for yourself. Hi, it's Ashley from Virtual Patent Gateway. Thank you for calling. Looking forward to teaching your colleagues. And through that process, you'll get down to a list, hopefully of 5, never less than 3, because the last stage of the naming process is to try and protect it. And as we just heard from Ashley's story, sometimes you think that something is available, but there's some catch in some system that prevents you from having the name that you wanted. That's why you always want to end the naming process with at least 3, preferably 5 names, not that you love, but that you could live with. That way, hopefully 1 or 2 of them survives and you have something that you're willing to use. Just to give your team an audience resource. When you are trying to decide what to name your business, I recommend that you have like a dictionary or dictionary.com, a thesaurus, or a book. One of my favorite books like that is the Synonym Finder, just to kind of get your names, words and ideas and synonyms out there. Another resource I would put out there is the United States Patent and Trademark Office website, uspto.gov. Really easy. You can do search trademarks, and then you go into the trademark database, and it'll give you a sense of the protectability of your ideas. But the last thing I'll say is, obviously, URLs, website addresses seem to be very important to all of us, as founders at least. And I want to tell you that it is published, it is known, people do not type web addresses. So I wouldn't worry too much about getting the exact same name. You might be able to create derivatives of it or use an interesting subdomain. But if you are curious about whether a domain is available, literally type it. Don't go to a domain procurement site, one of those website registration destinations, because if you use one of those website registration destinations to search whether a URL is available, it will get seen and bought. I had someone who's registered, try to search to see if their name was available. They called me to tell me it was available. I said, quick, buy it. They went back to try and register it, and it had gotten bought, and that person had a very unique name. So my recommendation is go to your web browser, type in http://www.virtualpatentgateway.com. And if nothing comes up, now you start to understand, okay, wait, there's no registration. Then you go into Google, you put, quote, virtual patent gateway, close quote. What starts to come up? Do you see any registered domains? Do you see anyone owning that language? Once you get a sense of its availability, have your credit card ready and the $9 it costs to register a URL, and then go to those domain search purchase utilities and get ready to sort of register a handful. I know that was a lot, but I wanted to give you one cut of some direction on the naming process.
That was very helpful. I had to learn the hard way. So when I actually purchased it, this is almost 3 years ago, because my company is almost at a 3-year mark in January 2023. So I didn't want to do virtual patent gateway. This is too long. And so I was like, maybe I'll do VP gateway, and it was available. And so I was like, I working at an IP firm before, so I know about, I didn't do trademark, I did mostly patent, but I know enough about it. It's like purchasing the domain. And so I got it like for a number of years. And so that was really helpful. And then at some point, let's talk about protection of the, because protection of the service mark, because I'm in a service industry, I'm not selling products, because it's actually consulting that I'm kind of selling. So at some point, working for law firms, and that basically how sometimes the how patent and trademark infringement works. So that the lawsuit that goes into it, I didn't want to get shut down, immediately, right? So I started looking into applying for trademark protection, like service mark protection. But as a startup, it's really difficult because, attorneys are expensive, right? And I knew enough to look into the PTO, the trademark database. So I searched that there wasn't any likelihood of confusion. And I went in and worked with someone because it's my company, so I'm not seeking legal advice for myself. So I actually decided to file the trademark application myself. And the reasoning for that is that, if I didn't get an office action, from the USPTO, then it will be just pretty straightforward. I just pay the fees, get the classification right, and then I'll just get the service mark. And it was just a matter of time. But if I actually get an office action from the USPTO, then I'll hire an attorney at that time. But I would have saved the upfront costs. I would have learned the process. So that's how I actually started doing this. And you see like my service mark, actually I got my service mark from the USPTO. I did have one office action, but the trademark attorney at the USPTO was super helpful, and they talked to me about the claims. I just didn't want to deal with it, so I hired an attorney to kind of help do that. So sometimes it's for cost benefits purposes. Sometimes it's good to just read the application and see if you can actually get through it. I cannot go tell other people how to do it, because that would be practicing law, but I can actually do it myself.
But your recommendations, I agree. I think that recommending those steps, and by the way, you used language. I think it's really important for anyone learning on this call to hear the language again. You said likelihood of confusion. So Ashley and I are not giving legal advice, but that is where an infringement comes from. It's not whether the name is the same name. It's the likelihood that an audience will be confused between two parties. And it's a strange filter, but that's why you have to ultimately hire legal counsel or use a website like LegalZoom.com or some other service provider to go through that administrative process and ensure that there is no likelihood of confusion, and that way you can protect your mark or patent.
Good. Next topic. We just talked about products. We just talked about like how VPG is a service firm. We provide, support for licensed attorneys, and I'm very careful when I even talk to the attorneys. The very first call that I would have before engagement is that here are all the parameters, and this is a scope of work. We'll do an engagement, and then after that, the very first thing was like, I might be very good at my job, but I'm still supervised by an attorney because that's the ethical boundaries that I need to follow. And so I will ask a lot of questions and make sure that we are on the same page. For example, if I have to file something, I will ask very specifically, do you want me to do this? Those are just things I've supported patent attorneys for like 20 plus years. And before that, I was in construction litigation practice. And I think that is very, I tend to ask a lot of questions, sometimes a little too much, but I err on being safe, on the safety side, because, once you file, it's a lot of issues there's a lot of challenges to fix something. I'd rather get something done right the first time. And so that's kind of really important to me, and to what quality is very important to me, kind of a perfectionist. But in terms of branding, are there any differences in branding for products versus services, in your opinion?
Well, we go through the same process to brand a product as we do a service. We go through the same process to brand a person versus an enterprise. We go through the same process to do business to consumer branding as we do business to business branding. So no, but just to make sure that the answer is understood, services are usually values based. They're what I don't mean values as an ethics. I mean as in I need to understand what value I am seeking and what value I'm going to get. And that often takes a little bit more explanation. Whereas products tend to have a finality to them. They kind of do something, and they're within the confines of doing that thing. A product might be packaged food. A car can be a product. Whereas when you're buying legal services, brand strategy services, coaching, there's sort of an indefinite nature to them, or at least there's the potential for them to be indefinite. So you think about what works better in each of those situations as different, but the process to arriving at what the answer is still the same. You still evaluate competition. You still evaluate industry language. You still assess who the audience is and what their journey is like. You still evaluate the communications ecosystem that they exist within and where they're going to be exposed to the service or the product. And once you've done all of that kind of analysis and due diligence, then you can kind of figure out where you need your product brand or service brand to exist in a healthy way. The process remains the same. The type of names, the types of messages, the types of attitude may be different, but not because they're specifically service or product, but because of who the audience is. And let me just use two very different products as an example. If you're selling a private jet, a Gulfstream private jet, that product's energy, messaging, personality, etc., is obviously going to be very different, probably more robust, probably going to need to be seen and heard a lot for someone to spend millions of dollars on buying that airplane. Very different than if you're trying to brand a piece of candy at the grocery store, checkout aisle, because the package is smaller, the exposure is limited, it's a very low cost transaction. So I would say that those two things are probably much more different than, let's say, product or service alone. Let's talk quickly about services. A service can be a one-time only transaction, but It again has probably this enduring value. I might go to the dentist, they might fix my tooth. That is considered a service. But if that service goes well, maybe I'm going to seek ongoing services. Separately, I might hire a law firm to forever support my business and protect me. That is a different kind of service purchase, even though it feels like it may last forever and different to the tooth that I hope once I paid for you to fix it, it's done. They're still considered services because a professional, a certified professional, is administering their expertise. Hopefully, they will solve your problem and then enable you to protect yourself from problems going forward. All that language to say there's still a buyer. There's still a buyer. In the service arena, there's a buyer. In the product arena, there's a buyer. In the business to consumer arena, there's a buyer. In the business to business arena, there's a buyer. And that is what brand strategy cares most about. The buyer, their purchase process, their understanding, and the confidence in their choice. And that should be the focus of any brand work you do, indifferent to whether it's a product or service.
Services in the life cycle of a business, during the life cycle of a business, services sometimes may evolve from the beginning to when it first started.
Yeah.
To like, because sometimes you will see like market factors, and then you'll say, oh, this might be a good area to expand,
Yeah.
sorry. And so one of the things is like, you will see some of the things on like my Zoom screen. It has, it also integrates companies' core values and what I think that you usually use like the chief belief officer or chief vision officer, one of the things. And it's really one of, some of those conversations and different talks that I've listened to that when I kind of, integrated them, I started realizing, how important it is to have vision as a leader, as the CEO, for the company. Because this is where it gets to, if you don't believe in it, the people that work with you to support you, I have like most of my teams and the people that are on the call to support me. And we talked about like leadership, and I decided to ask people, what kind of animal would you like to be? And what is the name, characters? This is a safe space. I feel like that is a safer space. And it also forces people to think outside of the box. Because if I said, hey, I'm Ashley, then there's only so much that you can actually come up with.
Right.
But when I've asked people like, if you have to be an animal, what would be your name? What would be your personality? And, then you really kind of get into what the people really care about. So I had someone that was talking to me, like one of my friends, she was like, I'm going to be a kangaroo. She's not on here yet. And she goes, I'm going to be a kangaroo. I'm going to be a mama, and I'm going to carry my kids around. So you really know what is important in her, to her. She might be a very high power attorney, but those are her core values. And that's one of the reasons why I decided that to team up with Angie to basically write this book, Building a Leadership Habitat. It was a lot of fun too. And then I had Illustrator, and it also turned into, it requires a lot of teamwork to do that. And I also wanted to mentor some young kids, they're not really kids, but young ladies. And they have such the millennial, I know that they don't like to be called that. So the younger generation, they have so much talent, and some of the things I'm like, I don't know how to do this. And then they would just turn it out, and I'm just sitting here being amazed. So we have a goal, like the illustrations, and I do have like regular calls with especially the 2-generation innovation young women, and basically talk them through, and then we create puzzles, we do different things. I pay them, but still it's good, especially during COVID, to have this one-on-one mentorship, because I was mentored by many very successful people. So I like to pay it forward that way. So I think the services, because of that, it turned into a lot more fun. Like we could create puzzles and then allow people to understand. Some of the people were asking, why are you creating a puzzle? I said, why not? I got the time and I have someone that can do this and we know how to, but through this process, I am trying to teach them that, everyone is sort of an entrepreneur in some way. You might not have a business, like a literal business, but you are actually out there to basically brand yourself and basically market yourself for whatever line of business that you're in. So you need to kind of learn, especially how finance management works, and because a lot of those are not taught in school. And you just kind of have to learn the hard way. And I don't take on too many mentees because I don't have the time, but I have a couple that I really am very, very happy because they've been with me for almost 2 years. So the service has expanded to that way. We are now looking into on-demand and, like training platform. And I have very talented people that really need a platform for them to grow. So that's how my service kind of expanded to so many different things. That's a long story getting into that. Any thoughts before I move to the next topic?
Well, there's 4 things that I heard, a lot of great things, but 4 things that stuck out that I thought would be worth sort of reflecting back on.
Okay.
One, you communicated that having vision is important, whether that's you're mentoring someone or you're communicating capabilities to coworkers and contractors. And I agree, it's very hard to follow someone who is not looking a couple steps ahead because you're constantly bumping into the back of them. It's sort of a funny way to think about it. But when someone is like looking up way ahead, you can just follow them. And so being visionary really helps people support you. Now, being visionary is different than what a mission would be. A mission is something very tactical. This is what we're doing every day, whereas vision is what we hope will happen because we do it. So mission might be, these are the steps we're taking. Vision might be so that we can get to that place. Okay, so that's why those two hang out so beautifully, and they also tend to inspire people. And that way, when you play sort of creative games like what kind of animal are you, people are not like, well, what's the end of this? You're like, look, I'm trying to create a culture where we all work together for these reasons, and if we know each other better and understand our personalities, we're going to be able to collaborate better. Well, that's visionary, to think about where you're going to take the business and what it's going to, and who's going to be involved in accomplishing that objective. So what's super cool about what you did with all the animals and giving everybody the power to choose that animal and name that animal is we actually know from scientific research that when you ask people very straightforward questions like, what is your personality? They have a really hard time answering the question. But when you put them in what is basically an avatar situation, create this video game character or make a collage with these parts or pick an animal, people have no problem. Oh, I'm a giraffe. I'm a giraffe because giraffes only make friends. Okay, fine. Well, there you go. There's a personality trait. You're a friendly person. So it's kind of an interesting game to play, but it's really powerful. If you're the visionary, you're trying to unlock people and get them to participate in the vision, giving these sort of like tangential analogs, like, well, this is kind of the framework, gives them safe space to see themselves and to use other characteristics, other forms to articulate who they are and how they feel. So I love that. Next thing is that you talked about how we are all entrepreneurs. I could not agree more. And I don't care if you work for a company that employs 50,000 people. The world works differently now. And therefore, we must all be entrepreneurial in our job. Ashley and I might both be founders. And so you're calling us entrepreneurs, but that doesn't mean that you by our side can't be entrepreneurial, helping us change processes, helping us better serve clients, help us solve for new products and services. So I do try to communicate to all my students that it is your job not to just sit back and do your job. It's your job to think about how you can advance that role and make it better and more value creating for your audiences. And that therefore requires you to be entrepreneurial inside an organization. And then the last thing I'll mention, Ashley, you sort of modestly mentioned that you are mentoring, you have mentees that you're coaching and counseling. And, anyone at first glance would say, oh, that's so nice of Ashley. And you sort of justified it saying, well, I had great mentors, and so I want to pay it forward. But I'll just say to anyone here, you will learn more about yourself and your expertise teaching other people than you will ever learn doing what you're an expert at. So this is my 25th year as a brand strategist, but it's my 16th year as a professor. And if you look at my career and my capabilities, there's a hockey stick curve that comes right when I started teaching. In 2006, when I started teaching as a professor, boom, everything about what I knew how to do it, how I could inspire teams to do it, what clients would trust me to guide them on, directly correlated to my willingness to give away what it is that I do. And I don't mean give it away like haphazardly. I mean, teach other people to do it. And it has not compromised my success, or my work hasn't gone to those that I taught. It has enabled other people to have careers that they love. So just again, if you took Ashley's words as, oh, that's so nice that Ashley's doing that, go out there, be selfish, all you listening. Go out there, be selfish. You want to succeed in your career. You want to be considered an expert. Go teach people what you do, and you will earn that right.
Perfect. Now let's talk about a couple of things that I've actually learned from your webinars, but I would really like the listeners to kind of also understand this. The first one is corporate social responsibility, CSR, and then the second one is the concept of social listening. And we have about 15 minutes, and those are like pretty serious concepts. So I don't want to do away without having you at least touch upon them.
Okay. Well, let's just talk about CSR and what it really means. And what it basically means, without getting into corporate and social and responsibility or ESG, the sort of European equivalent, environmental, social, and governance, it basically comes down to this. When we see someone succeeding, when we see a business thriving, something inside us asks, oh, well, I sure hope that they're not just becoming wealthy. I sure hope that they're also maybe doing something good. And for most of our lives, we never really thought more about it than that. Oh, okay, that's really cool. That CEO is doing so well. I sure hope that they're also giving back. I sure hope that they're donating. Well, what's happened in the last decade, primarily because of what the internet has enabled and how social media has started to inform people's choices, now we're not just wondering, we're actually asking, hey, big corporation who had a banner year, what good have you done for the world, given all the billions you're sending back to your shareholders, stakeholders, and leaders? Well, that used to kind of be just annoying. Now it is the requirement. We are setting expectations for all organizations and individuals that are succeeding to also give back with their success. It turns out that it's also good for business. When you give back based on what you do well, you get a whole new kind of credit for it. So let me give you an example from my business so that all of us can relate to this and apply it to their own. So as Ashley and I have already discussed, I run a brand strategy consultancy. I have 30 employees. We work on only doing long-term definition work for organizations and individuals. And that work is value creating. It affects the profitability, the revenue, the employee retention of these organizations. But what it comes down to is that I was raised in a house of philanthropy, and I used to get in trouble while working for other agencies because I would give away my brand strategy expertise to nonprofits. I would get threatened with termination. Sasha, if you work on another nonprofit project while you're here, you're going to get terminated. So when I started Innovation Protocol, I was like, well, guess what? At this place, we're going to spend 10% of our time working on nonprofits. So what do we give away? We don't give away money, and we don't give away labor. Like, we're not like packaging groceries because people need food. We're not experts at packaging groceries. And we can, as a firm of only 30 people, we can only write so big a check. But there is one thing that we can give away, which is good for the world, good for my staff, good for our clients, and that what we give away is what we do best. We give away our mastery of brand strategy. Turns out that nonprofits have audiences. They have donors. They have the beneficiaries. They have the community. They have the grant givers. Those audiences need an organization that communicates effectively. So what do we at Innovation Protocol do with our mastery? We help nonprofits communicate who they are and why they matter to the world. And guess what? It drives my employee morale. Our clients are in awe of it. It's a perfect place for us to keep maintaining our mastery and expertise. And those stories travel well. When we're pitching work and someone says, well, tell me about the projects you've worked on. And instead of picking big project number 10, we pick small project number 1,000 for a local nonprofit, which helps explain our process and the value we create. And that creates an emotional connection with our buyer that they can't forget. So Ashley asked about corporate social responsibility. It used to be a choice. Now it's a mandate. Now you're being evaluated on it, regulated against on it in Europe. In the United States, we are observing and expecting organizations to have goodwill, good action, community service, and contribution. I'm implying that it turns out that it's also good for organizational health, good for your clients and how they feel about you. And that's why I implore all of you to assess what you charge the most for and find an organization who could benefit from it and help them with your mastery. And you will feel good, they will feel good, and you'll have plenty of stories to tell about the great work you do.
Perfect. Do you want to touch a little bit on social listening?
Yeah. So what's cool about the world today, as frustrated as we are with social media and its intrusion into our consciousness, it's powerful because social media affords you the power to listen, to actually observe and watch your category and its audiences communicate. So what I always recommend to all of my audiences, all my clients, all my grad students is put up an antenna and listen. And what does that mean? That means don't take your name and register it for a conference. Create a handle, your research handle, register for conferences and webinars and classes and newsletters and white papers, etc., and use that handle to collect industry terminology, learning from webinars, etc. And what you'll do in social media is you'll be able to listen to your audience and their audiences communicate and interact, and you will learn from that dialogue. And this is something that you couldn't have paid enough. You couldn't have paid millions of dollars to get this kind of observation 20 years ago. In fact, it's true. When I was running focus groups 20 years ago, it's understood. You want to have a focus group with 10 consumers in it, it costs you $15,000 to $20,000 to run that session. That's what we used to do. We used to run 30 focus groups all over the world for any effort our clients were pursuing. And now we can register for a whole series of websites and listen to people chatter and learn via social listening as to what's most important to them. And then we use that data to inform our outreach. That's social listening.
So one of the things is innovation. It often has inherent risk.
Yeah.
And actually, sometimes it could be, especially when you're a company and you're doing things that has not been done before, especially when you're a startup. And it comes into a lot of challenges. And sometimes there might be haters out there that really want to see you fail. I don't know But what would you say to someone who is actually in the process, and should we actually look at the risks and the failures or the lessons learned? I hate to say failures, because in every opportunity, either you succeed or fail, you still learn some lessons. And sometimes the best lessons are when you actually did not get it the first time. And so what would you say, how would you encourage someone to kind of embrace, what mindset would you embrace, encourage people to embrace when looking at this and trying to kind of like go forward?
Excellent. Look, we think that we are a progressive organism. We think that we as humans want new. We think that we want revolutionary. We want the mostest, bestest, fastest, coolest, most innovativest. And it turns out that we are not that. We are very complacent. We drink the same style of coffee. We listen to the same bands we've listened to for 20 years. We like the same actors. And so even though there are plenty of new bands, new types of coffee, new shows, we go to what we know. And therefore, if you are innovative, if you are a change agent, you are going to disrupt people and their comfort. And so just decide that if you're going to advance a category, if you're going to change the way that work gets done, sign yourself up to have a lot of people get disrupted and vocalize, because you're changing what they always did, and that makes them uncomfortable. But if you decide that your innovation has purpose, that there's a problem that deserves a solution, I understand how to address that problem, and I'm going to bring the solution. I'm not just going to point and say, that's a problem, that's a problem, that's a problem. I'm going to point and say, there's a problem and I have a solution. Let me share it with all of you who want to learn and listen. Well, then you shouldn't feel bad that you're changing the status quo. You should feel like you are doing what is best for all parties, whether they realize it yet or not. But to make all of those, as you call them, haters, those that sort of communicated frustration when you brought about change, it actually goes back to why we named the company Innovation Protocol. Innovation is that word that everyone wants to talk about. It's kind of sexy and creative, and it's like everybody wants to be an innovator. But as your haters probably communicated, well, wait a minute, you want to create all this change, but what are the steps? What's the process? What are the stage gates? And so that's actually why we named our company Innovation Protocol. We wanted to be the protocol for brands that innovate. That way we can inspire people with innovation, but we can enable them with protocol. So quickly to summarize, innovation is distracting. It's reckless. It crashes and it creates risk. But if we always do things the way we did things, we're not going to advance as a society or as an industry. And so therefore, if you are inspired to change, if you are inspired to create and innovate, do it. But be sure to communicate what the plan is, what the process is, what the milestones need to be. That way, the disbelievers can see that there is a process path way forward, and it will assuage their disbelief. They will recognize the discomfort, but acknowledge that process sounds reasonable, and you will minimize their distrust, you'll minimize their distraction, and they likely will come around later and say, wow, you helped me keep my career fresh. Wow, you really invigorated our category. I'm really inspired to keep doing this work, or I'm inspired to offer these new services. So that's what I do every day, is I usually am telling people, hey, change is afoot. Hey, the way that you ran this business for the last 40 years, not going to work with the new way that people buy. And they get annoyed, frustrated, and defensive. But the next thing I say to them is, we actually understood that you would be frustrated. And that is why we have built this plan. Here are the steps, micro and macro, short-term and long-term. cheap and easy, expensive and hard. And by putting together that process, they calm down and actually come back excited to innovate.
Very good. We have about 2 minutes, and I want to see if anyone in the audience would like to ask questions, just in case. I can't believe that it's almost an hour. So if anyone has any questions for Sasha, feel free to type in the chat, or I don't know if we can actually allow you to unmute, but feel free to type in the chat, and I'm going to check on, on the chat.
Oh, it says that they can unmute. Perfect.
Yep.
Cool.
Anyone want to ask questions?
We covered a lot, so I can imagine that their brains are spinning. But let me just say this, because I know that we have, and Monique asked a question about Twitter and CSR. Cool. But I'll just say, any friend of Ashley's is a friend of mine. And if you want to direct questions to Ashley about what we discussed today, I'm so happy to field them through Ashley. So please don't feel like this is the confine of our conversation. All right, so Monique asked in the chat about Twitter and possibly separately about CSR. So let's talk about Twitter just for a second, and just so that this content here is evergreen. Right now, Twitter is going through a significant change. Elon Musk basically borrowed money and bought Twitter and is making a lot of change, and that change is disrupting the ecosystem. A lot of people are leaving, a lot of people are getting laid off, and a lot of the products and tools that he wanted to create or tried to build are backfiring a little bit. The only thing I want to point out is how much his personal brand is affecting the way that people feel about Twitter. And that's all I want to say, is that all of us should really think about how you feel about that individual and whether it's affecting the way that you feel about the product. And that's my point about personal branding and us as leaders of our organizations. Who we are, how we behave, how we communicate affects the way that people feel about our product and service. And I think it's inarguable that Twitter is important. I think it's inarguable that it creates real value in the world. But people can't think about that because they're too distracted by who the leader is and what their identity looks and sounds like. So that's my comment there about Twitter and its current state. Monique also asked a little bit more about CSR, and I'll just sort of finish my CSR thoughts out with, do not measure your contribution to the world by how much money you give. Do not measure your contribution to the world by how much you volunteer on the weekends. Measure your value, the value you create in the world as a giver, by how many hours of expertise you have given and what the value of that expertise would be. And you will feel whole. When you, at the end of the year, Ashley, identify 3 or 4 nonprofits that you have given tens of hours of counsel to, you will feel content in yourself, content with your relationship with the universe and our gods and goddesses and all the deities that inform and define our lives. And that is what is going to keep us working through tough times, whether it's COVID, whether it's a recession, the Great Resignation, a war. Whatever the case is going on in the world, it's kind of upon us as business leaders to bring inspiration via the work that we do. And when you are proud of the work that you do and its contribution to society, you can stay motivated even in dark times. And I know that's sort of a sad, morbid way to wrap this up. But look, the war that's going on in Ukraine right now is really hard to look away from. The layoffs that are going on in the Silicon Valley right now, really hard to look away from. And so those of us who are kind of going to work every day and trying to do our best, it's hard to do that when you know that a lot of people are suffering. But when you give away your mastery to organizations and nonprofits that would not have that gift, you can stay motivated through dark times. And that's the duty for us as leaders.
Well, thank you so much, Sasha. This has been an amazing time, and I'm very grateful that you took the time to spend time with us. So
it's because of you, Ashley, and it's worth us wrapping this conversation up by saying that in the last year and a half, I have had thousands of graduate students, Ashley, thousands. But people like you stand out. you ask meaningful questions, you make commitments, you deliver on those commitments. The hard work I asked you to do, you went out and did over and over and over again. You brought people into your cycle. You rejected the haters and pursued innovation, and it's creating real value for real organizations. So you're the right person to be leading this podcast, creating this effect. And I'm really, truly honored that you included me.
Thank you. And thanks to our audience. And I guess we could actually call it a night. Well, not so much for you because you are in the West Coast. And he has a lot of work to do. But thank you for taking the time, Sasha. Seriously, I really appreciate this. And on that
Pleasure.
note, we will conclude. Thank you, everyone. Bye,
Thanks
Sasha.
all.
Bye.
Pleasure.
Bye.